Hello, and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, you'll be learning how to incorporate navigation in an Angular project. For any website to be usable, there must be navigation. Navigation, in fact, is the process of transitioning between different pages or views in a website. Take, for example, Amazon. When I want to view a listing of my favorite books, I enter a phrase into the search bar, and a listing of relevant books appears. When I select a book, I'm taken to a different page or view of that particular item that I selected. This, in fact, is navigation. I invoke some action and I see some results. Well, in Angular, this process is made possible through their built-in router module. The router module is nothing more than a series of processes that allow us to create links or actions between different components or modules in our application. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we want to generate a new application. So we're going to say ng new my app. We're going to say yes to routing, and then we're just going to select the default CSS. Okay, now that the application has been created, let's go ahead and cd into that directory. So I'm going to do ls, then I'm going to say cd my app, and now we're going to go ahead and want to install two third-party dependencies. So we'll say npm install bootstrap, and then jQuery. We're also going to be creating three components, so we'll go ahead and generate those components now too. So we'll say ng, G for generate, C for component, and then we'll say about. And this is going to create an about component. So we'll generate another one. We'll say ng, G, C, contact. And then we'll do a home component. So we'll say ng, G, C, home. Okay, with all of our components created, we'll go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code and take a look at our folder structure for our project. And so hopefully if you remember from the last lesson, to add those third-party tools, we need to go into the angular.json file and add the references to the scripts and styles arrays. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Again, we're looking for the styles section and we're looking for the scripts section. So first I'll add bootstrap. So we'll say node modules. And if you're not sure, again, of where we're trying to look, you can open up and expand the node modules directory. You can look for bootstrap. So we'll look for it here. You're looking in the distribution directory, and then under CSS, you're looking for the bootstrap.css file. So we can say bootstrap, and then we're going to say dist, and then CSS, and then bootstrap.css. Okay, now we'll go ahead and add Bootstrap and jQuery to our styles arrays. So to do that, same process, we follow what we did with the CSS one. We just do /node modules. And in this case, this one is going to be our jQuery one. So let's scroll down so we can find jQuery. And again, it's under the distribution directory, and we're looking for jQuery.js. So we'll say jQuery dist, and then jQuery.js. We'll also add Bootstrap, so node modules, and then Bootstrap dist, and then Bootstrap. If you don't remember, is one we had already opened up, but we can look through it through our node modules directory. And now we're actually looking for the JS directory. And then we're looking for bootstrap.js. So if you look at the path, it's bootstrap directory, dist directory, and then it's going to be JS directory, and then bootstrap.js. So we can say JS, and then bootstrap app.js. Now I'm showing this on purpose so that you get familiar with how to locate and try to reference those in your application. Specifically, if you install a third-party package and you're not really sure of the location of it, now you know. You just go to the Node Modules directory, you find the package that you installed, and then you look through the folder structure to figure out the path so that you can get those added to your Angular.json file so that when you run your application, all of those styling and JavaScript files are loaded and they're working in your application. So we'll go ahead and close all this out. Now, if you'll notice for this time when we created our solution, we actually added another file, and that was going to be that app-routing.module.ts file. So when we said yes to routing, it generated this file for us. And so what we want to do is we want to add routes to our application so that when we click on those links, those contact, about, or home components, we actually get navigated to those components. So those links navigate to the components. So I'll open up this array, I'll create an open and curly brace, and then inside that I'm going to say path, and then I'm just going to give it the default where there's no value inside the quotes, and then I'm going to say component, home component. Now you're going to get an error message because we haven't imported over that home component, and to import that component we just say import home component, and then we just specify where it's at that we want to import the component from. So in this case, if we do a slash like that, we can say home and then home component. We're going to also need the contact and about component, so we'll go ahead and add those now too. So we'll say contact component. And then we also need one for the about. Okay, with those in place, we can go ahead and add the rest of our entries for our routes. Now, what we're basically doing is we're trying to sync up a component with a route so that when a user clicks or does something in our application, we show that component's HTML code. And so it requires a path and then the direction. So in other words, when I type in the URL, a certain path, I want to see that component. So we'll also have one for home, and then this one will be the home component as well. And so what does this mean? If I was to navigate, let's say I say HTTP localhost 4200. If I do /home, I'm going to show this home component's HTML code. If I don't specify a / anything, so in other words, I just leave it as http://localhost 4200, I'm going to show the home component. So I actually have two routes in place for the home component to display the home component. We're going to follow that same process for the about and contact. So I'll add another entry. We'll say path, and then we'll say contact, and we'll map this to the contact component. So same explanation. If I visit /contact, I'm going to see the contact component's HTML code. And I'll just leave these up there for a second just so that you can kind of get an idea of how the routing works or how this routing will look in our Angular application. So we can say home, so these two here, these go to the home component. This goes to the contact component. Now if I want to add one for about, I add another entry in my routes array. I say path about component, and then this is going to be the about component. I will have actually a route for that, right? So I'll say go to the about component. Right? So what do? So we've created 3 routes, and we're telling Angular when a user navigates to the URL for that specific route, we want to display that component. And that component is going to be the HTML code, the CSS, and the TypeScript code for that individual component that we've created. So in this case, we have one that says /home for a home component. We have one that says /contact for a contact. And then we have one that does /about for our about component. So I'm just going to delete this so we can actually compile this application. So we can save it like that. Now, if you go over to our app module directory, you'll notice that we already have the app component, the about component, contact component, and home component wired into our application. Well, that's great news. So the point is that whenever we are generating components through the CLI, everything gets wired together for us, which is another reason why it's good to use the CLI to create component services and modules, because the CLI is smart enough to add all of those dependencies and wire everything together for us, so we don't have to manually go in there and add those entries and wire everything together. If we didn't use the CLI, we would have to actually go into this declaration section and add those components that we just generated through the CLI. So what we'll also do is we want to go ahead and add a navigation bar to our app component. So if you remember from the previous examples, when you generate a new Angular application, it pre-generates this HTML code for that. Well, we're going to delete all that. And now what we want to do is we actually want to add a router outlet. Now the router outlet is going to be responsible for displaying the components inside that section of code. So in other words, in the router module, when I click a button, so let's say I have an imaginary button, and that button is to go to my Contact Us page. When I click that button, this route says, show the contact component, okay? Well, the router outlet is where that information or where that HTML code gets shown. So in our imaginary pretend scenario here, we're actually showing, and we'll use standard HTML comments, we're showing the contact HTML code, right? So the router outlet is the section where the components are displayed once they're configured in your routing module or your routing file. So we're going to have our router outlet, but we also want to have a navigation bar. So above it, I'm going to create a nav bar, and we're just going to follow a standard Bootstrap nav bar. We are going to have an unordered list, and inside that unordered list, we're going to have 3 list items. And those 3 list items, as you guessed it, are going to be for our each of our links that we're going to have created in our application. So we'll say nav, and then we'll have this as going to be a nav item. We're going to say it's active because this is going to be for our home screen, so our home component. And we'll just have an anchor tag, so we'll say class, this is nav link, and then router link. So this is a new entry, and we'll talk about it in just a second, but we're going to say /home, and then we're going to give it a name of home. So if you remember from our first lesson that we did, we just used plain hashtags, and we said, so we basically said this. We said href, and then we gave it a hashtag, and that's what we used because we know we wasn't going anywhere. But now we're using the router outlet directive, and the router outlet directive is going to say that when we click on this link, we want to go to /home. Now, if you remember from what I just explained in the router module, when we have /home, we're actually talking about this. We're actually saying the full URL /home, right? And /home is going to take us to this component, the home component, which is going to be the HTML code for the home component that we're going to create in just a few seconds. So we'll go ahead and go back over. And then we also need to add links for contact and about us. So what we can do actually is we can just take this, we can copy it, and we can paste it, because we're going to have the same code but just different links. So we'll remove the active so that we don't have all of them as being active links. And then we're going to change the names of these. Each of these are going to be called contact, and then we'll have about. Actually, we'll do about first, and then we'll do contact. So we'll say about, and then contact us. Okay, so we also need to change the router link where it's going to be navigating to. So this one is going to be about, and this one's going to be contact. So it's important to pay close attention to this. The router link directive lets Angular know that this is going to be a route, so that when I click this button, it's going to call the RouterModule file, and it's going to look for these routes. Okay. Once those routes have been found, the actual component code is going to be displayed in our router outlet. So that's very important to understand that, because that's the critical parts of an Angular application, and that's how Angular applications function. You click on buttons or you do some kind of action, and if you're using routing, that component or that action that you invoked for that service, module, whatever it was, those get rendered inside the router outlet directives or elements that you create in your application. So we're also going to have a body. So we're going to wrap this router outlet with a body. So we're going to say div, and we'll give it a class of row. And then we're also going to say, we're going to call it this one, let's do 12 columns. So we'll say column small 12. Now, what we want to do is we want to take this router outlet and we're going to put it inside this 12 column. And basically why we're doing this is that we're creating our main layout for our page is going to be a 12 column, 1 row section. So we'll just go ahead and leave it here like this for now. I'm going to add, just for styling so it's easy for everyone to see, kind of see how this works, is we'll add an alert section. And we're going to do this just so that you can kind of see that the contents is dynamic and it's being changed based on what we put inside those components. I like to add spacing just so that it's easier to see and everyone can have a good idea of exactly what we're trying to do here. Let's also give this a title, because it's nice to have titles for anything that we're creating. And we want to put this in a main container. So we'll say div class container. It's always better to have any sections of code that you're going to want inside of a container, so you can control scope of that of those elements that you're creating, of the HTML code that you're creating. So we'll put it inside just like that. So now we have a container. Inside our container, we have a row, and inside our row, we have a 12 column div section, and then inside that 12 column, we have just this alert div so that we can see some nice styling, and so you're able to see the dynamic changes of information we put inside those components. Well, like I said, we'll also add a title, and that title will just be kind of the title for the page. So we'll say H2 exercise 2.2 navigation. And then if you remember from our previous lessons, I always add those extra lines just so that this section of code is not right up against the nav bar. So we'll leave it like that. We'll go ahead and save it. And now let's go ahead and test what we have and see, you know, the code that we've created and see what it looks like inside Angular. So we'll go to a terminal. We'll say new terminal. And then we'll just do ng serve, because that's how we run our local Angular application. And it looks like we have an error message that says that node modules, jQuery distribution, jQuery.js does not exist. So we'll need to go over to our angular.json file and figure out how we're referencing it to make sure we're referencing it correctly. So let's go to this right here. This is what it's talking about. So it says an unhandled exception occurred, script file, /node module. And as you can see, node module. So let's follow this path and make sure that, you know, we have this correctly. And as we can see right away, it's node_modules with an S, and we have just module. So we add an S to this, we can go ahead and save it again, and then we should be able to run it. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important as you're building out your applications that you're paying attention to the error messages that are being displayed down in the terminal window so that you know you have a starting point on how to troubleshoot these applications. And really, some of the error message may not be as descriptive as we would like, but they are pretty helpful in helping us narrow down the problem. As you can see from this one, when I entered in that jQuery into the script section, I forgot to add the S to the node modules directory, and it was easy for me to troubleshoot because I went to this path, I located this path on the left-hand side, and I noticed right away that I forgot the S for the node modules directory. Okay, it looks like it's done building and compiling the application, and it looks like it's listening on port 4200. So let's go ahead and open up a browser and navigate to that port. So I'm just going to say localhost 4200. And if you notice in our screen here, we have our top navigation bar, we have that spacing that we talked about, and we have these 3 links. So right now it's showing us home works. And that makes sense, right? Because back in our code, we said, and I'll just pull up the router module. We'll see if we can put this on a split screen. We'll make this lower here. We said path, an open and closing quote, and we said home component. So we're basically saying if you entering nothing, and if you remember what I showed, I said http://localhost 4200, I want to show the home component. So if I don't enter in any kind of navigation, I want to show the home component. Now, I also want to show the home component if they say /home, right? So we'll delete this, save it, we'll let it recompile because it's, like I said, it's that live reloading that's happening there. And we'll go back over to our web page. If I type in /home, I still should show the home component. And if you noticed, it still says home component. So I can remove the /home, enter in it, I see the home component, or I can say /home, and I see the home component. Okay, but what about if I do /contact? So let's see what happens. Oh, I get it. Something that says contact works. Okay, well that makes sense because in our routing file, we said path contact, show the contact component. Well, what if I do about? About. Okay, I get a message that says about works. Okay, well that all makes sense. It should work like that. So what about if I click on the links? So we'll click on the about link. And then we can click on the contact link. So if you notice in the screen here, everything is changing. The content, the text value changes as we click on these different links. So home, about, contact. So we're dynamically generating and rendering HTML code for that component based on these routes that we have configured in our application. So let's take this a little step further and actually test this out. So let's go to our home component. Inside the HTML code, we just have this paragraph tag that says home works. So let's change this and we're going to say in H2, we're going to say welcome to the home page, ! We'll save it. Let's go back over to our browser and let's see what happens. Now let's click on the home component. Hey, look at that. Welcome to the home page. All right. So let's go back and let's do the same thing and actually let's change this to an H4 so it's not as big as our title. And then let's open up the about. We're going to change this text here. We're going to say H4, welcome to the about page. All right, let's go back over to our applications browser and let's take a look and see what happens when we go to the about section. Hey, look at that. Welcome to the about page. Okay, well that's cool. Now let's check out the contact page. I can remove this code. We're going to see H4 again. Welcome to my amazing contact page! Exclamation point, exclamation point. And we'll save that one. Come back over to our browser. And let's click on the Contact Us. Welcome to my amazing contact page! Exclamation point, exclamation point. So what's the point of this exercise? The point of this exercise is to demonstrate how can we navigate or move throughout an application, and how do we give users this experience where when they click on different links and different things in our application that they can see different views or different content. And we do that through the router module. And we use a routing file. So all we have is this routes array that's using this routes object. And inside this, we specify the location for the things that we're going to be interacting with or letting our users interact with in the application. So in our case, we had 3 components: home, contact, and about. And this routes array is what's responsible for providing that navigation for us. I encourage you as you work through this application, play around with it, make changes to the HTML code, and watch those changes live, those live changes in your browsers, just so you can get comfortable with the idea of how routing works in an Angular application. You create routes, you use the router outlet, and that's where that component gets rendered, and you just wire everything together through the modules of that specific of that set of components that you're working with. To recap, in this lesson you learned about the router module, how to add navigation to an Angular project, and how to reference the routes modules in your app.module.ts file. In our next lesson, you will be learning about data binding. Thanks for watching.